Hello and welcome to Back Pain Movement. I'm your host, Simon Schmid. My guest today is John Kempf, a strength and nutrition coach with a background in functional movement and sport performance. You also have been teaching yoga since 2013, and you have worked with high school, college, and professional athletes. Besides, you compete as a natural bodybuilder for a hobby. This year, you started your online business, Kempf Fitness Professional. Your focus lies on optimizing holistic health and fitness through exercise, nutrition, and mindset. John, welcome to Back Pain Movement.
Thanks so much, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here, man. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor for me to have to have you on my show. I'm so excited to have you here. I think I've seen you filled out the pre-interview form. Amazingly. You're the first guest that met it in those details. So I'm really pumped to get into the conversation. So normally I ask my guests as the first question, what image do you have of Switzerland? What pops into your mind when you hear Switzerland?
I've had a couple friends from college that went for internship, business assistantships over there, and I've never been personally. I don't know too much about it, but I've heard great things from them. When I think about it, words that come to mind are good economy, great scenery, good nature. Whenever I'm scrolling through social media, I'll see cool pictures of like rolling hillsides and awesome pictures of the scenery. So it looks like a great place, man.
Oh, great to hear that. Yeah, I'm always interested because there are a lot of different yeah images that people have about Switzerland. So I'm always wondering what people are thinking about our country. So
Yeah.
thanks for that. Yeah, as you know, I'm really interested in the topic of back pain. So as you work in this sector, you I think you have to do with patients with back pain on a daily basis. So when you just heard the term back pain, what pops into your mind?
Usually, when I think of back pain, it's kind of the iconic, oh my God, I get really stiff. I need to sit down. You know, when the nervous system is threatened like that, if it feels some sort of kink, it senses a threat in the environment. So it immediately wants to just sit down, relax. You don't want to work out. You don't want to move. You don't want to do anything. You just want to get the pain to go away. So that's usually the first thing that comes to mind.
Ah, interesting. So people they're trying to protect themselves by not moving. Did I get this right?
Yeah, yeah. Essentially, the nervous system just doesn't want to have any further kind of threat or damage. So it tries to send the signal of pain, like, hey, something's wrong, something's out of place here. We need to rethink what we're doing. And that usually is a strong enough signal with the pain and the muscle spasms where you can tell. I get people that'll come to me and you can see it in their face or hear it in their voice. They're like, my back's messed up, man. I need some help. Like anything, I'll do anything. Just make this pain go away. Everything's uncomfortable. I can't sit or lay down. I can't work out. So, yeah, it's usually a pretty big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your opinion? Do you think is it a good reaction that people have to not move, or should they move?
Well, it depends on the case, honestly. Everything is so situational, and usually the first response is due to some sort of excessive movement. They reach down in a wrong position and put excessive bend on the spine, or it often happens at the gym too, where they're working out doing something aggressive or high impact. And again, it's usually just due to a bad position and too much force on a certain part of the spinal cord, which is like home base to the body. It recognizes that as kind of the central computer system. If something happens to that, nothing in the body is going to work correctly. So it's very protective in that sense. And if it feels some sort of excessive threat in that area, it's going to want to stop movement. So it's usually the sign of whatever you just did or are doing is faulty in some way, excessive in some direction, but that doesn't necessarily mean stop moving altogether. And in fact, a lot of the research shows that encouraging movement, circulation of blood and lymphatic fluid and synovial fluid will actually encourage the healing process, but it just has to be correct movement and within the limitations of that specific case. If there's too much excessive movement, you're going to signal that pain response again, having the body say, hey, that's what caused it in the first place, stop doing that. So an analogy I use with my clients is, imagine you're playing in your backyard and you've got a fence around your backyard. That fence is your threshold for pain, and you want to play close to the fence, but you don't want to go on the other side of the fence. That's kind of your limiting boundary of the body saying, okay, we can control and handle this range of motion, which is, a simple definition of mobility, your body's ability to coordinate movement through joints in a specific range of motion, but only up until the point that they can handle that movement safely and controlled without putting any kind of excessive torque, pain, or kink on that spinal cord that's going to cause that injury response or pain response.
Wow, that's a fantastic image and analogy that you used. Haven't heard of that so far.
I love analogies, man. That's one of the best ways to communicate with people, is try to take that science and simplify it down and give them something that they can picture, like, oh, it kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. So in this case, what do you think? Do you have more patients that are their back pain is caused by an overuse of the body, or do you also have patients that are not moving enough? What are your experiences there?
What a good question, Simon. I would say it's kind of a blend of both, because the lack of movement is just as much of a signal to the cells to adapt to that position as is too much movement for the cells to take that same signal and respond in that way. So the muscles, a pretty well-known fact about the muscles is, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I like the analogy here of being the boss. Imagine you're building a building and you're the boss man, and you've got all your employees, the cells, waiting for the boss's orders for the blueprint so they can get to work. And if the boss doesn't show up, if he doesn't give orders to the cells, well, they're not going to work. They're just going to sit around and conserve energy. That's what the body's ultimately trying to do, is save energy. And it's saying, hey, he's not going to do this movement, or he's not going to use these muscles. So let's stop sending blood and nutrients and energy to that area, because we're just wasting it on something that's not being used. And in the same sense, Kelly Starrett had a good analogy that tissues are like obedient dogs. And if you give them a certain message and you're the boss, if you give them an improper blueprint or you give them incorrect orders, they're just going to follow through with it. They're just listening to what you have to say, stimulus response. And so if you tell them to bend over in this certain position that puts the spine at risk for kinking that nervous system over and over and over, it's usually that chronic adaptation to that signal, where the body is an amazing structure, a complex structure that you can really get away with doing things improperly, and it will distribute that force somehow and make that pattern work, but it's not necessarily good for the system in the long run. And you can see this in example of people with neurological disorders or movement impairment syndromes, where you'll see them walking with a dragging foot behind the body or a shifted shoulder down, and the body will make it work. It will find a way, but over time, those tissues have a finite capacity to undergo that stress, that movement. I kind of think of it as like Santa's big bag. Imagine you've got, I think I stole this from Kelly Starrett too, much love, buddy, but you've got a big bag of marbles, and every single time you do an improper movement, a dysfunctional movement, you take a marble out of that bag, and it's such a big bag that you've got so many marbles in there. Most people take it for granted that it's just this infinite capacity for the body to get around these positions. But then one day you reach into that bag and you're like, I'm out of marbles. So that's when the injury occurs. You're like, you didn't realize that you were yielding the tissue. You were abusing the pattern over and over and over until you reach in. You're like, oh, I don't have it. And that's when the muscle says, I'm done. I don't have any more capacity to go into this position anymore. Too much force is being put upon me and the tissue yields. You have that injury occur. And people go, well, it was an acute injury. It was this one time when I did this one lift, but it was actually the excessive signal that it got over and over and over from the orders that you gave it over a long period of time, and finally it gave out. So I'll get those patients that come to me and they're like, well, I did this one thing and it caused my back injury. And, well, you actually did it over and over for a long period of time, and finally the tissue just gave up on you.
Great image. Great. So do you have any advice for people who are working in offices, or for students in general, people who are forced to, I could say, who are forced to sit a lot in their everyday life? How can they do you have a solution to integrate probably more movement in their everyday lives?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It goes a lot deeper than just telling people to move. And I think the biggest problem is the disconnect between movement and our understanding of basic anatomy and function of the body. And I think of it as movement literacy, movement language. And when we're young, we learn how to communicate with other people right away. We sense the cues from nonverbal language, body language, and also then we learn our languages so that way we can express ideas, communicate, and learn from each other. With ourselves, we don't get that information. So we're taught how to communicate with each other, but not with our own bodies. And I think that's one of the biggest limiting factors, at least from my education growing up, until I started taking kinesiology and exercise science classes in my undergraduate degree. There was no real formal education on how the body actually moves in space or how it functions internally. And it kind of boils down to just a lack of internal awareness. And so the first thing I think we need to do is teach these basic principles of anatomy and human movement, so that way people can start to self-adjust and self-correct these faults that they have. Because it's not necessarily that they're not smart enough to apply these strategies or they're too stubborn to. Sure, there's definitely a certain amount of population where I get this with clients. I'm like, oh, that hurts. We'll do this. They're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. And they don't do it. And then the pain continues. Well, of course, you didn't apply any strategies. You didn't give the workers, the employees, new orders to carry out a different blueprint. But I really think it's just a lack of understanding. And if we can teach people more of those basic principles on how to position the body, how to move in space, how the body works, so they have that general awareness, then they'll be able to start making those adjustments on their own, especially when it comes to things like posture. So you've got people sitting at desks all day. We go back to the don't use it, you lose it model, where if you're not standing, you're not activating all the musculature needed to support the spine. You need to have strong, stable glutes, a strong pelvis, an oriented pelvis in a neutral position to make sure that you're not kinking that low back. You need engaged abdominals to make sure that you're keeping the mid-back, the mid-spine stable, and then you also need good posture in the upper body with the back muscles, the rhomboids and the traps, and all the musculature running through the rib cage up into the head and neck. If you don't have good awareness and good understanding of stability through those muscles from all the way through the trunk, that's where you're going to have faults in the system, and that fault over a long period of time eventually will lead to that adaptation, which puts you at a higher risk for injury based on that bad positioning, that kink in the garden hose, so I like to call it. Imagining that your nervous system, your central nervous system, is a garden hose. And if you kink the garden hose, the water, which is the electric signal that's running through your central nervous system, is going to be impaired. You're not going to be able to produce as much force or get the water out of the hose. And that's when the body goes, hey, we've got a serious problem here. And that's when you get that pain response.
Thank you. Great. So I'm a big fan of holistic models, and with your business, you are pursuing a holistic model. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite quotes whenever I think of the holistic model is, the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. And I get questions all the time from my audience, my clients. Hey, what do I do for X? Or what do I do for Y? What's causing this? And they want one variable. They want one specific thing, because it's easier, honestly, to be able to just address one thing as opposed to stepping back and taking the whole picture into consideration. But kind of just a loose expression I use with my clients is, there's always 40 variables involved in every decision or every problem. You know, you can't just think, oh, well, if I just sit up at my desk, all of a sudden I'll never have back pain again for the rest of my life. And so that holistic model really matters when you're starting to integrate all those ideas together. And then that goes right back to the movement literacy. Just like language, you can't just learn the alphabet or just learn how to speak in the present tense. You need to integrate all the different pieces of the language together to be able to have that good literacy, that good comprehension and understanding of how the whole system works. And if you just focus on one area, you'll miss the bigger picture. You'll miss that holistic kind of piece.
And in your experience, what are the different parts of this holistic model you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. It's a big part of it is the movement and the orientation, which is really positioning, and that movement literacy piece. But there's so many other facets. Nutrition is huge for physiological health, for cellular health. If the tissues and cells aren't getting the proper amount of sodium and potassium, they're not going to be able to fire the action potentials properly. It's really common, if you're low on potassium, you'll start to cramp. So that's just one really basic example of micronutrients. There's a lot of other ones, but I always look at the nutrition model as you've got a floorboard with, and every deficiency that you have is a crack in the floorboard. And that's where you're increasing your risk of falling through the floor. For every crack that you have, there's just more and more opportunities to create problems because of those deficiencies. If you don't have adequate number of B vitamins in the system, you're going to have problems related to that. Or if you don't have enough water in your system, the tissues are going to become dehydrated, and they're not going to be pliable. They're not going to have the proper flexibility that they normally would. If you're not getting enough sleep, that's one of the biggest factors, due to the increase in cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And the higher your cortisol is, the more you're producing adrenaline, and that's going to eventually lead to adrenal fatigue and that kind of burnt out feeling, which is kind of similar to overtraining, which a lot of people are getting now. That's one of the biggest issues. And also the autoimmune response that happens in the body due to the lack of nutrients or lack of water or sleep, or also the environmental stress. That's another really big factor that's causing the body to have kind of an alarmed response, a protective response. Just like if you were to get a fever, your body is heating itself up to try to cook out whatever foreign pathogens are in the body. And so that kind of model is happening over and over and over due to these environmental factors that are causing stress to the body. Day jobs are really stressful depending on what you're doing. The environment in general, getting stuck in traffic, anything that causes that stress response will increase cortisol production and increase the sympathetic fight or flight activation of the nervous system, which puts you in that high alert all the time. And your body's not meant to run at that kind of level. It has to downregulate. It has to have the parasympathetic, the calming, the rest and digest system kick on to go in and heal and repair and recycle and go through the other half of the picture. And so that's why so many people focus on one thing, like, well, what do I eat? Well, how are you sleeping? How many hours? What's the quality? What's your job like? How many hours a week are you working? What's your downregulation practice? Do you meditate, or do you have a breathing practice to encourage the body to go through those necessary processes to, again, kind of moderate the whole picture, the big picture? You have to take all of those variables into account.
Amazing. And what is your success secret to your health?
Another great question, man. I guess what's coming to mind now is the secret is there is no secret. What a boring answer, right? But it's true, because it just goes back to the awareness. And without getting too esoteric, if you have the awareness of your mind and your body in space, in your environment, you're able to dictate your behaviors, which goes, into the psychology realm of thoughts, feelings, actions. What you think is correlated to how you feel, which dictates how you behave. And so if you have a higher awareness, a higher understanding of what makes you tick, how the body works, what it needs to function at its optimal level, then you're able to go about your environment with a more educated, more sophisticated approach. You can combat, if you will, it's not quite the right word, but you can adjust to the environment and the different things that come at you, which people, call life. Well, this happened today. Okay, well, how did you respond to that? Because one of my favorite quotes, I think this is, I can't remember what book. Maybe it was Seth Godin in Lynchpin, or The One Thing by Gary Keller. I can't remember exactly, but responsibility is your ability to respond. And so when a stimulus comes in from the environment, you've got this bottom-up feedback system where your senses, your 5 physical senses, are constantly taking in this information and relaying it to the brain to give you an understanding of where you are in space, what's going on around you, and this gives you kind of an understanding of how to interact with your environment. But you also have a top-down system, which is where the thoughts originate in your brain through, a really complex system which we don't even fully understand yet. And that's what's really cool about neuroscience and the study of the brain, is they're starting to connect some of those dots. But you've got that top-down system where your thoughts are then associated with the emotions and then also predict your behavior. So you've got these two systems simultaneously going, and that's how you interact and function, is by taking both of these sets of data and information, integrating them together. And if you have this constant bottoms up feedback loop of stimuli coming in from your environment that you're sensing, if you don't also have adequate internal awareness through that top-down system, then the environment will start to dictate your behavior. And we see that so commonly in our environment now, in our situation now with people, is you put a chair in the environment, everybody sits down. They don't have the internal awareness, the top-down awareness, to realize, hey, sitting is actually causing an impairment to the system, which is then causing a higher risk for injury through these adaptations that are occurring because I'm now not sending the appropriate signal to my employees to tell them how to go about their daily functioning. So the body is just responding to what it's getting from the environment, and unless you're overriding that signal per se with better or more information, then the environment wins. Environment dictates behavior. And so that's why I think that quote is so powerful. Your ability to respond really dictates how you'll function in the environment, because if you have that internal awareness, that extra data, that information, then you'll be able to, make better choices. Ultimately, you'll be able to go about your day and understand, hey, don't do this, do that. This is good for my health. That's not good for my health. And so ultimately, going back to your original question of what the secret is, it's education, man. And there's so many shifts happening around the world and in our generation of a new approach, a more sophisticated approach to education, and teaching kids earlier in that sensitive period of development when they're young to get them to understand, oh, this does matter, as opposed to just not having that information and then defaulting to that environmental stimuli. You actually will be able to kind of counteract and work with or work around those stimuli. Like, for example, right now, I'm at a standing desk. We're having our interview here because I just know sitting for an hour is not going to be good for my body. And even when I work from home on the computer, I'll set up a fruit crate on my kitchen counter and put my laptop up there, and do work on that. Or sitting on the floor, too, is another great one. Just anything to get yourself out of those overused patterns throughout the day that don't contribute to optimizing your health. So all the education around it, which then ties right back into that holistic model too, is you have to have an understanding of the entire picture to make those better decisions.
Interesting. So you're proposing to implement a new school system, you could say, like to make our children from the very beginning to understand how our body works and how we do respond to the environment.
Most definitely, man. Absolutely. And I'm stealing a page out of Kelly Starrett's book again because he's a big influential role model for me. I really support his proactive approach. He implemented into his daughter's school system in California. I want to say somewhere around San Francisco. They started the first standing school. And they got stand-up desks for all the kids in the school, and they've got a little foot lever on the bottom of it for the kids to fidget with and play lift. And just kind of going into the children's model here, we look at these problems, and I'll take it from the top down, is we've got the pro athletes that have all these injuries and messed up bodies, and they go, those college coaches, they just didn't teach them right. Then you go to the college level, and they're like, oh, well, those high school, they didn't learn nothing in high school. Those high school coaches are a joke. And then you go to the high school level, and they're just like, oh, these kids are just coming in from middle school, and they're just messed up already. And so you keep tying it back, and you look at where did the problem start, and that's even with Western medicine. That's kind of where the approach is going, is as opposed to trying to just put a Band-Aid on the symptom and treat the symptom. Let's treat the cause. Let's go back to the original issue, and if we can fix it there, then we fix the whole problem. My best analogy for this is I always think about it as a children's playground, and you've got the slide that the kids go down, they love it. But if you're standing at the bottom of the slide and you're receiving the kids coming down, you're like, good job, and you see a nail sticking out of the slide halfway down, you're letting these kids go down the slide, scrape their leg on the nail, and then when they get to the bottom, you're discussing with your colleagues how you should fix the scrape on their leg. Should you bandage it, or should you put on some antibacterial cream? Well, how about you just go up to the slide and take the nail out and you fix the problem? And so if we look at where the nail is with human movement, kids start wearing shoes and sitting in desks right around, they're wearing shoes earlier, but, they're sitting in desks come age 5 when they get into the school system. And look at the problems that we're facing with kids. We've got this ADD, ADHD, hyperactive disorder issue with kids because we're taking objects or humans, beings that are meant to be in motion and constantly moving and adapting and growing to their environment, and we're forcing them to sit down. And I can relate to this heavily because I've always been a super active kid. I'm always moving, and that's something that I've had to deal with myself, of being in the school system and like daydreaming and moving around, and my mind is always really active. So having to try to like center that and control that by centering my body and stilling my body has been really tough, and it's been a practice that I've been working on a lot more with meditation and stuff. But when you're a kid, if you don't learn how to express yourself through movement, it's really hard to stay focused and stay interested in whatever's going on in the environment. And so the kids, of course, they react with dysfunctional behavior, or they get upset. Of course, all they want to do is run around and play outside. So why don't we take the classroom outside and put them in an environment conducive to what their brain and body wants to do, which is to learn through movement, and then it ties right back into that movement literacy, teaching them. You can take them out into the woods and teach them about science and teach them about nature and all these things that they wouldn't learn in the classroom, but you can do it in a moving environment, in a more applicable environment where they're stimulating more areas of their brain, they're learning better, but they're also happier, and they're not having this issue with, the ADD, the hyperactive disorders that we're seeing a lot more of. And then you tie that right into the physiological issues. Children's obesity is skyrocketing. Children's diabetes. I mean, diabetes used to be for type 2 diabetes was considered for adults, and now they're calling it early onset diabetes because children and teens are getting it at an early age because they're sitting down and they're eating junk food. Well, of course, the body is responding. I mean, diabetes isn't a mystery. You could Google search that and find out the causes really easily. So, it's tying it back to the original cause, and we're sitting them down in a desk. We're shutting down the functions of the body. We're essentially doping them up with drugs and then forcing them to learn in this certain way that's not conducive to how the human body and brain were meant to be used or developed. And so I think that's our biggest issue, like you were saying, is we'll implement a new school system. Absolutely. Take the desks out, get them outside, get them learning in nature, get them moving around, and we're going to solve a lot of these later developing chronic disease issues that we're seeing in our culture just because we're addressing it at the start. We're addressing it at the original problem. And even with shoes, just a slight digression, but you look at the problems with the mechanics at the hips and the low back. Well, it's you stuff a kid's foot in a shoe all day long, and of course you're going to have adaptations to the tissues and the bones due to this morphing shape of the foot. And it's funny because we used to make fun of people in Eastern traditions for breaking the foot or shortening the foot or changing the arches to make them, a certain foot model for dance or whatever for the royalty, and we laugh like, oh, that was so crude and cruel. And then now we're stuffing kids' feet in these Michael Jordan shoes for a 2-year-old, and it's just like, oh my gosh, you're changing the kid's foot position before he even can learn how to walk properly. Like, no wonder we're having higher instances of hip and back pain. I mean, the contact point for the human body is through the foot to the ground. So if you're messing up the original point of contact, you're of course going to mess up the structure all the way up the kinetic chain. And I mean, my example of this is put mittens on for 10 years every single day and tell me how well you're able to do fine motor skills with your hands. Of course you're going to lose that ability. If you don't use it, you lose it. It goes right back to that stimulus response model of cells. So yeah, like you said, we need to really implement a new system from the start, from the beginning.
Thank you. I'm interested in your business. So why are you pursuing this online business now, and what are your goals?
Yeah, well, kind of going off that long tangent I just had, I've been training clients in person directly for 9 years now, and I've seen a lot. I mean, I'm by no means a master or a guru in the field, but I've seen a lot of cases. I've dealt with a lot of cases. A great example, I was just hanging out with a friend the other day, and I totally forgot because a lot of this stuff to me, I deal with it so much, and that literacy is so natural and subconscious for me now that I don't even think about it. It's automatic. And so I have kind of an expectation sometimes that people like, well, why don't you get this? Like, oh, that's right. You never learned it. You never practiced it. You haven't developed that unconscious behavior. But one of my friends, Ty, he had low back pain last summer and he came to me. He's like, dude, my back's messed up. What do I do? And it was just such a simple, easy fix for me. I'm like, oh, well, you're tucking your butt under and you're putting a lot of flexion on your lumbar spine. That's kinking your garden hose. Your body's giving you the response, hey, you're kinking the garden hose, knock it off. So I taught him, hey, get yourself out of this bad position by doing X, Y, and Z. Turns out when we did a couple movement tests, his hamstrings were super tight. The hamstrings were pulling on his pelvis, which was causing the tilt and the rotation, which then went upstream to the low spine. So if you pull on one end of the rope, it's going to cause movement on the other end of the rope. And so his hamstrings were pulling on his pelvis and his low back, causing this pain. And he went to stretch his hamstrings, but he was doing so while flexing that low spine, while still contributing to the issue. So I taught him how to anteriorly tilt the pelvis, which just means dump it forward and take that rounding out of the low back while stretching his hamstring. And then we just worked on a little bit of core function, improving his spinal stabilizers. 8 weeks later, he was completely pain free, and now he's one of my biggest advocates. He's like, go see John. John's the man. He's magical. He cured me in 8 weeks. And it's like, no, I just gave you the information to reprogram your cells that were sitting around waiting for the boss to give them the right blueprint. And so the reason I'm going more online is because I want to reach more people. It's much more about education now to me than it is about training. A great quote I heard is, good trainers train clients, great trainers train trainers. And so that's more of my model now, is how can I get my message out to more people? And by no means am I the first person to talk about this. I'm just following in the footsteps of other great coaches and great teachers like Kelly Starrett, for example, a couple in the functional movement realm, Gray Cook and Lee Burton. They've really established kind of a baseline set of normal movement for people, which by no means is the global end-all be-all. There's a couple other great coaches and practitioners, Dr. Andrea Spina through functional range conditioning. I went through his program for the mobility specialist certification last year. Very eye-opening. He's got a great approach. Same with Ido Portal. I kind of put those two in the same general box because they're kind of preaching on the other side of the spectrum, that we don't need to overharp on functional movement and getting these people in a neutral spine position all the time, because then you're just going to have the cells adapt to that position, and that necessarily isn't good either. And so that's why I like that holistic model, because I integrate strategies and principles from all of these coaches. I've gone through the functional movement screen. I've been studying Kelly Starrett since 2010. And Ido Portal and Andrea Spina have some great information too on how to kind of integrate all these principles into a more global movement practice that allows you to use the body in all ways possible, not only for bracing and stabilizing and maintaining those neutral positions, but also to do the other things, the cool stuff like maybe handstands or bridges, or how to let the body go through abnormal ranges of motion, but do it safely and comfortably. Because if you've never trained those patterns, then when you go into them, your chances of injury are going to be a lot higher, because the body's never been there. It doesn't know how to deal with moving and contorting in those different positions. So you need to first understand how to brace, how to position yourself. Positioning is key. But then from there, once you learn those basic principles, just like movement literacy, like with a language, then you can start learning the nuances and some of the other specific changes and adaptations the body can go through once you have those core set of principles. So with my online business, my goal is to just get the education out to people and teach them that movement is an amazing thing. I've been fascinated with it since I was a kid, and I just want to inspire other people to take it upon themselves to educate themselves, to gain their own internal awareness, to do the things that they want to do in life without having be injured or having themselves hold back from their full potential. That's really my ultimate goal long term with my business, is just to help inspire people to reach their full potential in life. And movement is such a big key to that. If you can move well, you're improving cognition of the brain, you're improving your confidence, you're able to do more things in your environment. You can go hike, jump, swim, travel, do all those fun, inspiring things that are also good for the brain too. So it's just feeding into each other of, move well so that way you can live well. And that's kind of the message I want to get out to people, and using health and fitness as my background to get the people in the door and teach them, hey, this holistic model matters. You need to focus on your nutrition. You need to drink enough water. You need to make sure you're sleeping. You need to make sure you're managing your stress. You need to have a movement practice that's something different than exercise. Like, well, I do CrossFit. That's my movement practice. That's exercise. So that's not actually practicing all these global ranges of movement and local ranges of movement, specifically focusing on the function of the joints and the tissues, and making sure you're learning the whole time of like how the body actually works and functions. And if you have that core set of principles and that base set of knowledge, then you're able to go into the world and apply those things and be a better human being. Ultimately optimize your life quality. That's the end goal, is make everybody better at being humans so they can go out and do whatever they want to do with their life and just be better at all things.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm also wondering, in 2011, you yourself had like an injury, you broke your ankle, and how was it for you, and how did you go through this different time, this difficult time?
Yeah, man, that was tough. That dark times for sure. I was in college, and I came up with a strength and conditioning background, played sports through high school and played some semi-professional football in college. So I was all about the sacrifice your body, lay it all on the line, lift heavy weight, get strong and powerful. And I was actually coming home from the gym leg day, and it as I look back and connect the dots, it all makes perfect sense, and it's great because it was a learning lesson for me. But I saw some friends playing some pickup basketball, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll play. And I was wearing a pair of shoes. If anybody knows, they're called Brooks Beast, and it was this model of the Brooks running shoe. No offense, Brooks, but they were really stability focused, had like a 1.5 inch cushion heel. It was like wearing high heels with no support at all. And so I was just off a leg day. I had no resilience in my tissues to absorb landing force. So my quads were beat, my glutes were beat, my core was beat. So I came down from a rebound, and I landed a little bit cockeyed on my foot. And of course, it rolled right over because of the shoe. And I didn't have the resilience to hold that weight and distribute the force through the rest of my body and kind of make up for it. And I tore my ATF ligament, my PTF ligament. There are a couple of ligaments on the outside of the ankle that connect your fibula to your talus, which is one of your foot bones. And it basically is the kind of preventative mechanism from your ankle rolling over. It stops it from going too far and then dislocating your ankle. And that's what happened, is I went so far past the normal range of those tissues that they gave. And so the ligaments tore. I broke the edge of the malleolus, the ankle bone, and I had some avulsion fractures too, which is where the bones actually pull away from the bone. So they're super painful. It was absolutely awful, man. And and I'm a kinesiology student. I'm an athlete, and injuries will happen no matter what. But it was so devastating for me because I identified myself through movement and through sport and activity. And it was really bad. I was in a boot for, I think, 8 to 10 weeks or something. And I, at the time, lived in a studio apartment. And so I was by myself, completely isolated. I could barely walk from my bed to my living room with crutches. That's how bad it was. And so I was just propping my leg up and laying there like all day long, and just I was in just such a depressed state and wondering like if I was ever going to be able to rehab it. And the surgeon told me that I had two options: either to get the surgery or deal with it on my own, rehab it my own way. And I didn't have health insurance, so that kind of left me with no choice but to rehab it on my own, which was a blessing in disguise because I was in kinesiology. I was a student strength and conditioning coach volunteering at the university. So I had the environment, I had the tools to allow me to start to implement these protocols to rehab it myself. And so that's what I did. And the journey was so many ups and downs. Since I didn't have those ligaments there, the ankle would roll out of place super easy. If I put any force on the lateral side of my ankle, it would just give out and I would just fall to the ground like a sack of potatoes and kind of re-sprain it, re-injure it over and over. And I did that constantly just on my journey of trying to rehab it. And when I would re-injure it, it would be another week, another 2 weeks of back to square one. Okay, no movement. Start unloaded, just doing joint circles and stuff and icing. And it was just so discouraging in the short-term perspective because of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back every time. And so it forced me to start looking outside of my previous knowledge base for information on how to fix it. And that's, I'd found Kelly Starrett right around that same time. And he talks a lot about joint mobilizations and putting the body in proper positioning, which I've been talking a lot about. And so it forced me to learn new strategies and work around my injury, and it complemented my movement literacy and my knowledge base so well because I had more time to educate myself on kind of the lower side of the spectrum. I was always on the higher side of the spectrum with strength and performance and high intensity, but the corrective exercise, the rehabilitation, the physical therapy kind of stuff I hadn't dove into at that point in time. And so it was great because now I have that kind of double-sided education and understanding on a practical application on both ends of working with myself and my clients for high performance and strength and power development. But also I was forced to learn through my kinesiology classes and my experience with my ankle, and then the education from these other coaches, more of that regressed physical therapy, corrective exercise model. And now it's just so seamlessly molded together for me in a beautiful way to take someone that may be sitting at a desk and teach them from ground up how to get to that higher end of the bell curve if they so wish. And that's a lot of the disconnect right now in the industry is you've got your strength and conditioning coaches that work on the high end but don't understand the low end, and you've got your physical therapists who understand the low end but they have no idea how to progress someone out of their office into a gym setting. And so it just constantly sends the loop back over. They get cleared for physical therapy, they go to the gym, they're there for 2 weeks, the chronic issues have not been taken care of, the positioning's still wrong, the body isn't built up enough to handle those higher impacts, those higher intensities, and so they end up right back in the physical therapist's office. And so being able to understand both ends of the spectrum has allowed me to bridge that gap and really focus on teaching people how to go from one end to the other and meet people wherever they need. And that's kind of the biggest thing, is being able to work with anyone across the spectrum from age 0 to 100 with whatever the issues they have. And that process was huge for me in learning that, because I had to spend years. It took me 3 to 4 years to rehab it. And even now I have to be conscious and aware of where my ankle is in space, because I still don't have those ligaments. The tissues around them have become much more resilient and healed to the point where they can take the stress. If I do like have the potential of rolling at those other tissues will kind of step in and compensate some of that force so it doesn't go all the way over. But I still have to be careful of what I do. And yoga was actually one of the biggest rehab practices that I implemented. And again, it was all coincidental timing, right? Now it was perfect because my boss came up to me at the same time just after I'd gotten cleared and I was moving again. He's like, "Hey, how would you like to start teaching yoga at the rec center?" And I was into the idea. I was like, "Oh, perfect. I'll be able to spend extra time rehabbing my ankle and working on my mobility and stuff and my balance." And so I used yoga with a physical mindset of trying to fix my ankle and work on those human issues of balance and coordination and flexibility. But then after teaching and practicing for 6 months to a year, I started to develop more of my own internal awareness from the yoga practice, which it was so beneficial to all the other areas of my life. It brought more awareness to my actions and my thoughts and my feelings and the environment. So it just tied in together so seamlessly and perfect. And that's why I encourage people to pick up a movement practice like yoga or Pilates or Qigong or Tai Chi, something where you're not exercising per se, you're just trying to educate yourself and increase your awareness of where your body is internally and within the environment. So that way, when you do go to exercise, which should be another one of your regular practices, you have a better understanding of how to position your body, how it works, and then that way reduce your risk of injury and increase your performance at the same time. So using that whole kind of integration of systems, the physical therapy, the yoga, the movement practice, and my own knowledge of strength and conditioning through other performance coaches, I rehabbed my ankle, and eventually that's when I decided, well, I'm probably not going to be able to do a lot of high impact sports anymore. So I still love exercise. I love the work behind the continual growth and development of the human body. So I decided to start bodybuilding. And that was kind of my testament to myself at the end of the injury journey was, I took all of that for what it was, used it to develop my skills as a trainer and a coach and a teacher, but then also kind of brought me into bodybuilding. And now developing my physique is just as much mental as it is physical too. So I've got my bodybuilding practice, my movement practice, and then my exercise to kind of integrate everything together, which goes right back to that holistic model. So, it all ties back into the original source, which is the coolest part about the journey is you can't ever focus on the negative. You just got to roll with it, continue to learn, continue to grow, and eventually it's going to work out. Something good will come out of it. And I would not be who I am today. I would not be the coach I am or the teacher I am without those experiences, without that injury for me to really sit down and learn. I didn't realize how narrow-minded I was in the sense of sport and performance and a strength coach. It really taught me how to step back and address these other issues and bridge that gap between corrective exercise, physical therapy, and strength and conditioning. So it was a blessing.
Yeah, it seems like that. Great. So, one of my favorite questions I like to ask my guests is, imagine after you died, mankind would build a museum of your life in honor of your legacy. So imagine your museum, and yeah, what do you see? How would you like to be your museum?
That's awesome, man. It's kind of funny because with my whole approach to the holistic model, I look at it as mind, body, spirit, and I use my health and fitness knowledge and background to really get into people's minds ultimately and teach them the movement literacy, but really the internal awareness of how to function. And sneakily, ultimately, my goal is to work on people's spiritual development and help them connect back to themselves, back to everyone else, back to the source, back to the universe, whatever you want to call it. And so ultimately for me, I'm just here to help people. I'm just here to serve others. And I don't expect or necessarily want any kind of commemoration or, you know, anything like that. Like if anything, I would, you know, look at it as like a statue with nothing there. You know,
Okay.
as funny as that sounds or corny as that is, you know, I mean, I can't remember the quote or who said it exactly, but the best memory would for me to be not a memory at all. You know, something in that sense where I don't care if people remember me at all. I just want to help people. I just want to change lives, and I totally understand by doing so that will create the legacy of, you know, love and compassion, and you know, like that's if I were to say anything, if I had to objectify something, I would say I want to be known for loving others and showing compassion and teaching. You know, we're all teachers and we're all students, and it's just your perception of yourself and your environment. And so, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily want any kind of commemoration whatsoever, as long as I knew within myself that I did everything I could to help people and grow to my highest potential while I'm here. That's like my two rules I've got written down in my car on my dashboard, actually, is optimize the microcosm to optimize the macrocosm. You know, focus on the self first, optimize yourself, and then from there, the only other goal I have is to just help others, just to love others and be of service in any way I can. And if that's through movement, if that's through health and fitness, if that's of helping someone carry some groceries to their car or help someone across the street, that's what I'm here to do, man. I'm just here to help people and love people and show people that we all have that potential and capability to be better, to be better humans.
Thank you. What a wonderful ending. Amazing. So yeah, I have to thank you. It was a wonderful talk, conversation having with you. So thank you so much for taking your time, for sharing with us all your knowledge, your insights, your ideas, your thoughts. So John, thank you so much for being in my show.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I really appreciate it, man. I had a lot of coffee. I got a lot off my chest. I feel a lot better now. But it was great, man. I really liked this. This was an awesome conversation. If you ever want to do this again, I'm here, man. That'd be awesome.
Thank you so much. So to my listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, just ask me questions if you want to know anything. If you have any suggestions for interview partners, go for it. I'm here for you and hear you or see you at the next show. Bye bye.